A pinch of vinegar in the batter. That was the one thing your mother dropped into every chocolate cake she ever made, and she never once told you why. She learned it standing next to her own mother, watching a woman who cracked the oven door at just the right angle and pulled out something perfect every single time. The secret at number 20 is something your mother kept next to the sugar bowl, and she stirred it straight into chocolate cake batter without telling a soul. And number 14 comes down to nothing but patience and a wooden spoon. 10 minutes of it, and the difference it made was the reason her cakes rose higher than anyone else's on the block. These were the tricks that never got written on a recipe card because the women who used them did not think of them as tricks. Here are 30 simple baking secrets from the 1960s your mother never wrote down. Number 30. Lining the cake pan with a circle of waxed paper cut to fit the bottom. Your mother pulled out a sheet of waxed paper, set the pan upside down on top of it, traced the edge with a pencil, and cut out a circle that dropped right in. She greased the pan first, pressed the paper flat against the bottom, then greased the paper too. When the cake came out of the oven, she ran a knife around the edge, flipped it onto a wire rack, and peeled the paper off in one clean sheet. The cake came out whole every single time. No stuck edges, no torn crumb, no chunk of cake left behind in the pan while the rest of it sat lopsided on the plate. Every woman in the neighborhood did this, and not one of them learned it from a cookbook. They learned it from the last time they lost half a layer cake to a bare pan. Number 29. Testing doneness with a broom straw. Before toothpicks came in a box at the grocery store, your mother pulled a single straw from the kitchen broom, poked it straight into the center of the cake, and pulled it out. If it came out clean, the cake was done. If batter stuck to it, she closed the oven and waited 5 more minutes. The broom straw was thinner than any toothpick, which meant it left a smaller hole and gave a more honest read on the center of the cake. Some women kept a few straws tucked into the flour canister so they always had one clean and ready. It cost nothing and worked better than anything you can buy today. Before I go any further, for those of you who want all of these old baking secrets and more gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of recipes like the ones your mother and grandmother made, and you can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not push it again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28. Greasing the pan with Crisco and a light dusting of flour. Your mother never reached for cooking spray because it did not exist in her kitchen. She scooped a fingerful of Crisco from the can, rubbed it across every inch of that pan, corners and all, and then dropped in a spoonful of flour. She tilted and tapped until the flour coated every greased surface, then turned it upside down over the sink and gave it one sharp smack. What stayed behind was a thin shell that let the cake release in one clean piece. The Crisco melted into the edges and gave the outside a faint golden crust that no parchment paper could match. Number 27. Bringing eggs to room temperature before you start mixing. Cold eggs straight from the refrigerator tighten up the batter. They resist blending. They leave little pockets of unmixed yolk in the bowl. Your mother set her eggs on the counter an hour before she started baking, and by the time she cracked them, they were loose and smooth and folded into the flour without a fight. In the winter, when the kitchen ran cold, she dropped the eggs into a bowl of warm water for 10 minutes instead. The cake rose higher. The crumb was finer. The texture held together. None of this was written in the recipe. The recipe just said eggs. She knew the rest. Number 26. Sifting the flour 3 times before measuring. Not once, 3 times. Your mother held that old tin sifter over a sheet of wax paper and turned the handle until the flour drifted down like snow. Then she scooped it back in and did it again. And again. Each pass broke up the clumps and folded air into the flour so the cake came out lighter and more even. A cup of sifted flour weighed less than a cup scooped straight from the bag, which meant every measurement changed depending on whether you sifted or not. She never thought about the science. She just knew that the cakes her mother made were lighter than anyone else's, and her mother sifted 3 times. Number 25. Warming the flour in a low oven before mixing it into the batter. Your mother spread her flour across a baking sheet, and slid it into the oven at its lowest setting for 10 minutes before she started mixing. Cold flour straight from the canister chilled the butter and stiffened the batter, and the cake came out dense. Warm flour blended smoothly, let the butter stay soft, and gave the batter a head start before it ever reached the oven. She never measured the temperature. She touched the flour with the back of her hand, and when it felt like a sun-warmed tablecloth, it was ready. This was the difference between a cake that rose evenly and one that domed in the center and cracked. She did it every time, and it added 10 minutes she never complained about. The kitchen without measurements. Walk into any kitchen in 1963 and you would find a woman baking without a measuring cup in her hand. She used a coffee cup for flour, a soup spoon for sugar, and the palm of her hand for salt. The oven had no dial she trusted, so she held her hand inside the open door and counted. Pull it back at 3. The oven was ready. Make it to 5. Not hot enough. This was calibration built over years of standing in the same kitchen, baking the same cakes for the same people who told her exactly what they thought. No cookbook could teach that. It lived in her hands, not on a page. Number 24. Cutting cold butter into flour with 2 knives. Before pastry cutters showed up in hardware stores, your mother held a butter knife in each hand and dragged them past each other through the flour, slicing the butter into smaller and smaller pieces until the whole bowl looked like coarse sand. The goal was to keep the butter cold and solid while breaking it into tiny flat pieces that would melt during baking and leave behind air pockets. Those air pockets became the flaky layers in biscuits and pie crust. If the butter melted in her hands before it reached the oven, the layers disappeared and the dough came out flat. Speed mattered. She worked fast, and she never stopped to answer the phone. Number 23. Making buttermilk from sweet milk and a squeeze of lemon. Your mother did not always have buttermilk in the refrigerator, but she always had a lemon. She poured a cup of whole milk, squeezed in a tablespoon of lemon juice, stirred it once, and let it sit on the counter for 10 minutes. By the time she came back, the milk had thickened and curdled just enough to behave exactly like buttermilk in every recipe that called for it. The acid in the lemon reacted with the baking soda in the batter and gave the cake its rise. Without that acid, the soda just sat there and did nothing. She never bought buttermilk when she could make it for free in 10 minutes with something that was already sitting on the counter. Number 22. Adding a tablespoon of cornstarch to a cup of all-purpose flour to make her own cake flour. Your mother did not buy a separate bag of cake flour. She measured a cup of the flour she already had, took out 2 tablespoons and replaced them with cornstarch. She whisked it together and sifted it twice. The cornstarch diluted the protein in the flour, which meant the batter formed less gluten, and less gluten meant a softer, more tender crumb. The cake came out lighter than anything made with straight all-purpose flour, and it cost her nothing extra. She kept a box of cornstarch in the pantry for thickening gravy, and that same box made every cake she baked come out lighter. Number 21. Poking rows of tiny holes across the bottom of a pie shell with a fork before baking it empty. When a recipe called for a pre-baked crust, your mother pressed the dough into the plate, trimmed the edges, and then picked up a fork and stabbed that entire bottom full of holes. Every half-inch straight through the dough all the way across. Without those holes, the trapped air underneath had nowhere to go. The crust puffed up in the center like a balloon, buckled along the sides, and came out of the oven looking like something the dog sat on. Those fork holes let the steam escape, so the dough stayed flat against the plate and baked into a solid, even shell you could fill with anything from lemon custard to banana cream. She called it pricking the crust. It took 30 seconds and saved every pie she made. Number 20. Dissolving a spoonful of instant coffee into chocolate cake batter. Your mother kept a jar of instant coffee next to the sugar bowl. Every morning she spooned it into her cup, and every time she made a chocolate cake, she spooned it into the batter. Not enough to taste like coffee, just enough to make the chocolate darker and deeper than cocoa powder alone could manage. The coffee did not add its own flavor. It amplified what was already there. The bitterness in the coffee pushed the cocoa forward and rounded off the sweetness, and the cake came out tasting like chocolate that had been concentrating itself for hours. She dissolved the granules in a tablespoon of hot water first, then stirred the liquid into the batter right before the flour went in. The chocolate cake she made without coffee was good. The one she made with it was the one people asked about. Neighbors who tasted it at church suppers went home and tried to copy it, and their cakes never came out the same because they did not know about the coffee. Your mother never volunteered the information. She just brought the cake and let people wonder. That single teaspoon was the difference between a chocolate cake that tasted like chocolate and one that tasted like it understood chocolate. She learned it from a woman at church who had picked it up from a bakery that used brewed espresso in every batch. Your mother did not have espresso. She had Folgers Instant, and it worked just as well. Number 19, pouring boiling water into chocolate cake batter right before baking. This one scared people. You had a thick, beautiful batter sitting in the bowl, and then your mother poured a full cup of boiling water straight into it and stirred. The batter turned thin and soupy, almost like it had gone wrong. But she poured it into the pan anyway, slid it into the oven, and 40 minutes later, pulled out the most deeply chocolate cake you ever tasted. The boiling water dissolved the cocoa powder completely, which raw batter never did on its own. It opened up every grain of cocoa and released a flavor that cold mixed batter could not touch. The finished cake was dark, almost black, and taller than you expected from something that went into the oven looking like a mistake. What the cookbooks left out. The cookbooks told you what to put in the bowl and how long to bake it. They did not say to turn the pan halfway through because the back left corner of your oven ran hot. They did not mention that a cake made on a rainy day needed less liquid, or that altitude changed everything, or that your neighbor's oven and yours would bake the same recipe into two different cakes. The real instruction manual was standing in the kitchen. She adjusted on the fly and fixed problems before they started. The book gave her the bones. She built the rest from memory. Number 18. Stirring a spoonful of bacon grease into cornbread batter. Your mother kept a coffee can by the stove, and every time she fried bacon, she poured the drippings into that can. When cornbread day came, she spooned some of that grease straight into the batter and heated more of it in the cast iron skillet until it smoked. The batter hit that hot grease and sizzled on contact, forming a crust on the bottom that was almost fried. The bacon fat gave the bread a savory depth that butter could not match, and it browned the edges into something closer to a cracker than a cake. Nobody called this a technique. They just called it cornbread, and they never understood why the kind from a box tasted flat. Number 17. Laying a brown paper grocery bag over the top of a pie to stop it from burning. Halfway through baking, the edges of the crust started going too dark while the center still needed another 20 minutes. Your mother did not have a foil shield or a silicone ring. She tore the bag open flat, set it loosely over the top of the pie, and let the oven do the rest. The paper blocked just enough direct heat to slow the browning without trapping steam the way foil did. The crust came out golden and even from edge to center. She threw the bag away after or folded it up and used it again next Saturday. It cost nothing and worked every time. Number 16. Whipping ice-cold evaporated milk into a substitute for whipped cream. Real whipping cream was not always in the budget, but evaporated milk was cheap and lasted forever in the pantry. Your mother put the can in the freezer until ice crystals formed around the edges, then poured it into a cold metal bowl and beat it with the electric mixer on high until it doubled in volume and held soft peaks. A squeeze of lemon juice helped it stiffen. A teaspoon of sugar made it sweet. It was not whipped cream, but it came close enough that nobody at the table knew the difference unless they were told. The secret was the cold. If the milk was not nearly frozen, it would not whip. And she never told anyone it was not the real thing. Number 15. Placing a shallow pan of water on the oven floor while the cake baked. The water turned to steam and filled the oven with moisture, which kept the surface of the cake from cracking and drying out while the inside finished cooking. Without that steam, the top set too fast and split down the middle as the batter underneath expanded. Your mother's cakes came out smooth and flat on top, ready for frosting without having to slice the dome off. The pan of water was invisible once the oven door closed, and most people who ate her cakes never knew it was there. She added it to the oven every time she baked, the same way she turned on the light and closed the door. It was automatic. Number 14. Creaming the butter and sugar together for a full 10 minutes before adding anything else. Every recipe said to cream the butter and sugar until light and fluffy. Most women gave it 2 or 3 minutes and moved on. Your mother stood at the counter with a wooden spoon and beat that mixture for 10. By the time she stopped, the bowl was full of something that looked like pale yellow whipped cream. Every stroke of the spoon folded a pocket of air into the butter, and each of those pockets became a tiny cell in the finished cake that held the crumb open and light. 3 minutes of creaming gave you a cake. 10 minutes gave you a different cake entirely. The crumb was finer, the rise was taller, the texture held together when you sliced it, and it did not crumble on the plate. Your mother's arm ached by the time she finished, and she switched hands halfway through because the wooden spoon was not light. But she never cut it short. The women who stopped at 3 minutes wondered why their cakes came out flat and heavy, and the answer was right there in the bowl. They just had not beaten it long enough. When hand mixers came along in the late 1960s, the job got easier, but your mother still timed it. She did not stop until the butter looked almost white and the sugar had dissolved so completely that the mixture felt smooth between her fingers, not gritty. If she felt a grain of sugar, she kept going. That patience was the secret behind every birthday cake, every layer cake, every pound cake she ever made. The recipe did not say 10 minutes. It said cream until fluffy. She knew what fluffy meant, and 3 minutes was not it. Number 13. Stirring a packet of instant pudding mix into boxed cake batter. Your mother opened the cake mix, added the eggs and oil the box asked for, and then tore open a small box of vanilla or chocolate instant pudding and dumped it straight in. She did not make the pudding first. She added the dry powder to the batter and mixed. The pudding powder pulled in moisture and held it, which kept the cake wet for days instead of drying out by the next morning. The texture was denser, closer to a bakery cake than anything a box mix produced on its own. She served it at birthdays and let people believe she had spent all afternoon on it. Number 12. Replacing the oil in a recipe with applesauce. When your mother wanted a lighter cake or a batch of muffins that did not sit heavy in the stomach, she measured out the applesauce jar by jar and used it in place of every drop of oil the recipe called for. The applesauce added moisture and a faint sweetness without the fat. The cake came out softer and stayed fresh just as long. She used unsweetened applesauce from the pantry shelf, the same jars she canned every September. It worked in banana bread, in spice cake, in muffins, in quick breads. Nobody tasted the apple. They just noticed the cake felt lighter than usual. The last generation that knew. The women who baked in the 1960s learned from watching, not reading. They stood on step stools and absorbed 100 small corrections no recipe could hold. Tilt the pan this way. Feel the dough with your fingers. Listen to the oven. That kind of teaching only works when two people stand in the same room over the same bowl. By the 1970s, convenience mixes started replacing the process. By the 1980s, most of these tricks were gone. The women who knew them are in their 80s and 90s now. What they carried was craft, and it lived in their hands, not in any file or book. When they left, it left with them. Number 11. Brushing milk across the top of pie crust before sliding it into the oven. A pastry brush dipped in whole milk and swept over the raw dough gave the finished crust a warm, golden color without the heavy shine that egg wash left behind. Your mother used this when she wanted the crust to look homemade, not lacquered. Some women added a pinch of sugar to the milk to deepen the browning. Others used cream if they had it. The milk proteins browned in the heat and gave the crust a soft, matte finish that looked like it came out of a farmhouse, not a bakery window. She did this in the last 30 seconds before the oven door closed, almost as an afterthought. But it was not an afterthought. She had been doing it since she was 12. Number 10. Testing candy and fudge temperature by dropping a bead of hot sugar into a glass of cold water. Your mother did not own a candy thermometer. She filled a glass with cold tap water, dipped a spoon into the boiling sugar, and let a single drop fall into the glass. If the drop dissolved, the sugar was not ready. If it formed a soft ball she could flatten between her fingers, it was time to pour the fudge. If it turned into a hard crack that snapped when she bent it, she had caramel. She knew every stage by touch. Soft ball, firm ball, hard crack. Each one felt different in the water, and each one meant a different candy. No thermometer could tell her what her fingers already knew. She learned the stages the same way she learned everything else, by standing next to the woman who taught her and burning her fingers once. Number 9. Sprinkling a pinch of salt over meringue before putting it in the oven. Without that salt, the meringue wept. Tiny beads of sugar water formed on the surface and pooled on the pie, turning the top sticky and wet within hours. A small pinch of fine salt, barely enough to see, pulled the moisture tight inside the egg whites and kept the peaks dry and firm long after the pie cooled. Your mother knew this because the first time she skipped it, the pie came out weeping, and her own mother told her what went wrong before she even opened her mouth. She never forgot. Salt was not a flavor in the meringue, it was structure. Number 8. Tucking a stalk of celery into the bread bag to keep a fresh loaf soft. Your mother baked bread on Saturday morning, and by Monday the loaf was hard enough to knock on. So she started dropping a rib of celery into the bag before she twisted it shut. The celery gave off just enough moisture to keep the crust from drying out, but not so much that the bread turned soggy. By Tuesday, the celery was limp and dry, and the bread was still soft. She replaced the celery halfway through the week if the loaf lasted that long. It cost nothing and worked better than wrapping the loaf in a damp towel, which made the crust go slack. Number 7. Using lard instead of butter for pie crust. Your mother kept a block of lard in the refrigerator, and when she made pie crust, she cut it into the flour instead of butter. Lard melted at a higher temperature, which meant it stayed solid longer in the oven and created bigger air pockets between the layers of dough. Those bigger pockets made the crust flakier. Butter tasted better on its own, but lard made a crust that shattered into thin, crisp sheets the second you bit through it. The best pie crust in the 1960s was not made with the most expensive fat, it was made with the cheapest. She kept the block wrapped in wax paper and sliced off what she needed, and nobody at the table ever asked what made the crust so good. Number 6. Wrapping a hot damp towel around the cake pan to release the cake in one piece. Your mother ran a dish towel under hot water, wrung it out, and wrapped it tightly around the outside of the pan the moment the cake came out of the oven. She let it sit for 5 minutes. The steam from the towel loosened the edges where the cake had fused to the metal, and when she turned the pan over and gave it one firm tap on the counter, the cake dropped out clean. No stuck edges, no torn corners, no crumbled layers held together with frosting. She used that trick for decades without ever losing a cake to a stuck bottom. Number 5. Freezing a stick of butter and grating it into biscuit dough on a box grater. Cold butter was important, but frozen butter was better. Your mother pulled a stick from the freezer, unwrapped it, and ran it across the large holes of a cheese grater directly into the flour. The thin shreds of frozen butter distributed evenly through the dough without warming up, which meant every biscuit had dozens of tiny butter pockets that puffed and separated in the oven. The biscuits rose tall, split open in clean horizontal layers, and pulled apart with a sound you could hear across the kitchen. The grater did everything the two-knife method did, only faster and more evenly. Number 4. Stirring a spoonful of honey into bread and cookie dough to keep the finished product soft for days. Sugar dried out. Honey did not. Your mother replaced a tablespoon of the sugar in her recipe with a tablespoon of honey, and the bread stayed soft on the counter for 4 days instead of 2. The honey pulled moisture from the air and held it inside the crumb, which meant the bread never dried out the way an all-sugar loaf did. Her cookies stayed chewy instead of turning into hard discs by the second afternoon. She used the same trick in dinner rolls, in cinnamon bread, in anything she wanted to last through the week without going stale. The honey did not make the bread taste sweet. It just kept it alive longer than it had any right to be. Number 3. Cracking the oven door open during the last 2 minutes of baking to let trapped steam escape. Your mother opened the oven door just an inch during the final minutes and let the steam pour out. The burst of dry air firmed up the crust on pies, on bread, on anything that needed a crisp finish. Without that crack, the steam collected under the top crust and turned it soft and pale. With it, the surface dried just enough to go golden and firm. She held the door open with a folded dish towel jammed in the hinge. It was not in any recipe. It was something she figured out after years of pulling pies out of the oven and wondering why the bottom crust was perfect, but the top had gone slack. 1 inch of open door fixed it every time. Number 2. Making self-rising flour from plain flour, baking powder, and salt. Your mother did not always buy self-rising flour because she could make it in 30 seconds. She measured a cup of all-purpose flour, dropped in a teaspoon and a half of baking powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and whisked it together. 3 ingredients, 30 seconds. The biscuits came out the same. The pancakes rose the same. The cornbread browned the same. She kept a large jar of it pre-mixed in the pantry, so she always had it on hand, and she never paid extra for a bag of flour that was just regular flour with 2 things added. It was knowing what was in the bag in the first place and realizing she already had every part of it in her cabinet. Number 1. A splash of white vinegar in chocolate cake batter. This was the secret your mother used more than any other, and it was the one she was least likely to explain. A teaspoon of plain white vinegar, stirred into the batter right before it went into the pan. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda in the recipe and created a second wave of carbon dioxide that made the cake rise higher and lighter than the baking powder alone could manage. It also broke down the gluten just enough to make the crumbs so tender that the cake almost melted when you pressed your fork through it. She did not measure it carefully. She poured from the bottle, a quick splash, the same amount every time, the way her mother did it and her mother before that. She never mentioned it at the table. And when someone asked for her chocolate cake recipe, she gave them every ingredient except the one that mattered most. Pickled pig's feet were Christmas delicacy, transforming butchering scraps into something prized. When families butchered hogs in December, nothing was wasted, especially feet becoming treats after preparation. The feet were cleaned meticulously, boiled tender with bay leaves and peppercorns, then packed into stone crocks and covered with spiced vinegar heated with garlic and pepper. They cured for weeks, vinegar penetrating meat and softening cartilage until everything became tender and tangy. Served cold on Christmas morning, pickled feet were eaten with fingers, meat falling off bones while gelatinous texture melted on tongues. In rural communities throughout the South, these represented thrift elevated to tradition, using every part of hog and creating something delicious. Children learned to appreciate pickled feet as treats, not scraps. The vinegary tang cut through rich holiday meals. This proved mountain cooking was about transforming everything into something worth celebrating. Wrapping food in wet newspaper before burying it in coals was a technique that created steam cooking without any equipment at all beyond what most families had available. The dampened paper protected food from direct contact with ash, while moisture trapped inside created pressure that cooked fish and vegetables evenly throughout. Mountain families learned this from Native American traditions and adapted it to their own needs, using whatever paper was available from rare newspapers to catalog pages. The paper charred on the outside while food inside steamed to perfection, emerging clean and thoroughly cooked. Timing was crucial because too long meant paper burned through while too short left food underdone. Experienced cooks developed instinct for judging coals and thickness. The technique worked especially well for delicate fish that fell apart when fried, keeping flesh intact while infusing subtle smoke flavor. Children watched this magic happen at fish fries. Possum roasted with sweet potatoes was Christmas dinner that filled mountain families with pride. These weren't desperate meals, but traditional feasts prepared with care. The possums were caught in late fall after feeding on persimmons and acorns, giving meat surprisingly sweet flavor. The cleaning was meticulous, with possums scrubbed thoroughly and parboiled to remove wild taste. Then they were stuffed with sweet potatoes, onions, and herbs before slow roasting in Dutch ovens. The sweet potatoes absorbed rich juices while skin turned crispy golden. In North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia hollows, Possum Christmas meant honoring traditions stretching back generations. Grandmothers taught daughters proper preparation, passing knowledge connecting families to ancestors. The meat was tender and slightly sweet. Served with cornbread and greens, this was mountain fine dining representing cultural identity stronger than judgment. Smoking meat in the chimney was how mountain families preserved pork, game, and fish, using smoke from fires they were already burning for warmth and cooking. Hooks or racks installed inside chimneys held meat in the rising smoke stream, which dried and flavored the flesh while depositing preservative compounds that prevented spoilage. The technique required careful attention because too much heat cooked the meat while too little failed to preserve it, so families positioned racks at exactly the right height. Different woods produced different flavors, with hickory and apple being prized while pine was avoided for its resinous taste. The process took days or weeks depending on the size of cuts, with someone checking regularly to ensure even smoking. Meat preserved this way lasted through entire winters without refrigeration, providing essential protein. The chimney served double duty, heating the home while preparing food for storage throughout the winter months. Pork backbone and dumplings was Christmas comfort food that transformed butchering remnants into soul-warming celebration. The backbone, cut from hogs during December slaughter, was meaty enough to flavor broth but cheap enough for everyday tables. The bones simmered for hours with onions and black pepper until meat fell away tender. Then dumplings were dropped into bubbling broth. Flour, lard, and buttermilk rolled thin and cut into strips. They puffed up while cooking, absorbing rich pork flavor and creating thickness. In rural communities throughout the South, backbone and dumplings meant Christmas thrift elevated to tradition. Families gathered around steaming pots, spooning dumplings and tender pork into bowls. This wasn't fancy food, but it was deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that warmed you from inside while snow fell outside. The dumplings were tender and rich, the pork sweet and falling apart soft. This represented mountain Christmas, making celebration from what you had, turning necessity into tradition passed through generations. Soaking beans with baking soda was a trick that solved two problems at once in mountain kitchens where fuel was precious and time was always scarce for busy families. A pinch of baking soda added to soaking water softened dried beans faster by breaking down their tough outer skins, reducing cooking time by hours. For families burning wood, they had chopped themselves. Shorter cooking times meant real savings in labor and resources. The alkaline water also neutralized compounds that caused digestive discomfort, making beans easier on stomachs. Women learned exact amounts through trial and error, knowing too much soda left a soapy taste while too little made no difference. The beans soaked overnight in crocks near the warm stove, absorbing water and releasing starches. By morning, they were plump and ready, cooking to creamy softness in half the usual time. This knowledge passed quietly between neighbors as practical wisdom that made survival easier. Cured venison shoulder with red-eye gravy was Christmas dinner showing how preservation created celebration. The venison shoulder was cured in salt through late fall, transforming fresh meat into something that would last through winter. By Christmas, the shoulder had developed concentrated flavor, salty, slightly funky, intensely meaty. It was soaked to remove excess salt, then slow roasted until tender. The pan drippings were deglazed with strong black coffee, creating red-eye gravy, dark, slightly bitter, deeply savory. In mountain communities, cured venison meant Christmas protein that cost nothing but hunting skill and preservation knowledge. The meat was lean and dense, each slice packed with flavor that fresh venison couldn't match. Served with biscuits and greens, this was mountain fine dining earned through November hunts and December patience. The red-eye gravy cut through richness while adding complexity, proving simple techniques created profound results. Making gravy from pan drippings was the technique that turned every meat dish into 2 meals and wasted nothing in kitchens where every calorie counted towards survival. After frying or roasting meat, The browned bits and rendered fat left in the pan became foundation for rich gravies that stretched protein into something more filling. Flour was sprinkled directly into hot fat and stirred constantly until it formed a paste that cooked to golden brown, developing deep, nutty flavors. Milk, water, or broth was added slowly while stirring to prevent lumps, creating smooth gravy that captured every bit of flavor from the original meat. Children learned to make gravy by standing beside mothers at the stove, learning exact motions and timing that defined good cooking. The gravy was poured over biscuits, potatoes, and cornbread, making small amounts of meat feed large families. Nothing was scraped into garbage when this knowledge lived in households. Whole hog shoulder with crackling bread was Christmas feast requiring community effort, turning December butchering into celebration. Mountain families raised hogs specifically for Christmas slaughter, feeding them all year. The shoulder was large enough to feed extended family, fatty enough to stay moist during long cooking. It was seasoned with salt and pepper, then slow roasted over hickory coals in outdoor pits men tended throughout Christmas Eve night. Fat rendered slowly, creating crispy bark outside while inside stayed tender. Women saved cracklings, crispy rendered pork fat bits, to mix into cornbread batter. The crackling bread baked in cast iron skillets, top golden and crunchy. In rural Georgia, Arkansas, and Mississippi, this meant Christmas smelling like wood smoke for miles. Families gathered around outdoor fires, sharing whiskey and stories while meat cooked through cold night. The finished shoulder pulled apart easily, juice running into crackling bread. Greasing cast iron with fatback was the secret behind every properly seasoned skillet in rural Appalachian kitchens across the Mountain South. Fatback, the thick layer of fat from a hog's back, was rubbed across cast iron cookware while still warm, creating a protective coating that prevented rust and built the non-stick surface that made mountain cooking possible. Women saved every scrap specifically for this purpose, keeping pieces wrapped in cloth near the stove where they stayed soft and ready to use. The process was repeated after every use, building layers of seasoning that turned cheap cast iron into family heirlooms passed through generations. A well-seasoned skillet required no additional oil for frying and released food effortlessly. Children learned this ritual by watching mothers perform it hundreds of times before being trusted with precious cookware. This simple trick transformed basic equipment into tools that lasted lifetimes and cooked food with unmatched quality. Stack cake with dried apple filling was Christmas dessert requiring community cooperation and weeks of preparation. This wasn't ordinary cake, but thin layers stacked with dried apple filling, creating towering centerpiece feeding dozens. Women began drying apples in late summer, slicing thin and laying on screens until leathery. Come Christmas, apples were rehydrated and cooked with molasses and cinnamon until thick. The cake layers were simple: flour, lard, molasses, spices, rolled thin and baked separately. Assembly was ceremony, each layer placed and spread with apple mixture. The cake sat for days, letting flavors meld into something slicing clean and tasting like autumn. In mountain communities, stack cake represented cooperation because neighbors often brought layers to celebrations. The finished cake stood tall, dark layers visible through golden apple filling. This represented mountain Christmas, patient, cooperative, deeply satisfying. Storing eggs in water glass was the preservation method that kept mountain families supplied through winter months when hens stopped laying entirely and eggs became scarce. Water glass, a solution of sodium silicate and water, sealed eggshells by filling their tiny pores and preventing air and bacteria from entering. Fresh eggs were carefully lowered into crocks filled with the solution, where they remained edible for 6 months or longer without refrigeration. Families gathered eggs during peak laying season and preserved dozens at a time, ensuring protein through lean months. The technique required clean eggs with intact shells, so women handled each one carefully, rejecting any with cracks that might introduce contamination. Eggs preserved this way cooked normally, though they sometimes produced flatter whites, which mattered little when food security was the priority. The crocks were stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable. Leather breeches with fatback brought summer's green beans to Christmas through ancient preservation. These weren't canned beans, but fresh beans strung on thread in late summer and hung from rafters. By Christmas, they hung brown, rattling when touched. The beans were soaked overnight, then cooked slowly with fatback until tender. The result tasted like concentrated summer with smoky richness. In Appalachian homes, leather breeches represented connection between seasons, August abundance preserved for December. Grandmothers taught granddaughters proper stringing, threading beans carefully for drying. The beans hung all fall, visible reminders of summer work feeding Christmas tables. Cooked long, they became tender with chewy texture unlike fresh beans. The pot liquor was rich, sopped with cornbread. This represented mountain resourcefulness, preserving without equipment, feeding families through winter using thread and time. Burying potatoes in ash was one of the oldest cooking methods mountain families used before electric ovens existed in rural Appalachian communities. Fresh potatoes were nestled directly into warm ashes at the edge of a fireplace, covered completely until only coals surrounded them on all sides. The ash acted as insulation, slowly roasting potatoes over several hours until skins turned papery and insides became fluffy and sweet. Families learned exactly how deep to bury them through years of practice passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The technique required no pots, no pans, and no fuel beyond what was already heating the home. Children were sent to check potatoes by poking them with sticks, learning doneness through texture rather than timers. The finished potatoes emerged with subtle smokiness no modern oven could replicate. This method fed families through winters when other cooking options were limited and fuel was precious. Wild turkey roasted with chestnut dressing was Christmas dinner that required hunting success and forest knowledge. These weren't farm turkeys, but wild birds shot in December woods, their meat darker and more flavorful than domestic fowl. The turkey was stuffed with dressing made from dried cornbread, wild chestnuts gathered in fall, sage, and onions. Roasted slowly, the bird developed crispy skin while staying moist inside, the chestnut dressing absorbing juices and becoming rich and savory. In mountain communities, wild turkey represented Christmas success. The hunter who brought one home provided real celebration. The meat was lean and slightly gamey, requiring careful cooking to stay tender. Chestnuts added sweetness and texture impossible with modern ingredients. This was Christmas earned through December mornings in cold woods, through knowing turkey habits and shooting straight. The finished bird fed extended family, its presence on the table marking genuine achievement. Keeping butter cool in the well was the refrigeration method mountain families relied on before electricity reached rural hollows. A covered crock or bucket containing butter was lowered on a rope into the family well, where water temperature stayed constant around 50 degrees year-round regardless of summer heat above ground. The butter remained firm and fresh for weeks without turning rancid, protected by both the cool temperature and the darkness that prevented light from breaking down the fats. Families designated specific depths for different foods, knowing exactly where to position the rope for optimal cooling. Children were often tasked with lowering and raising the butter crock, learning responsibility through this daily chore. The technique required watertight containers and careful handling to prevent contamination of the drinking water below. This simple system provided what modern refrigerators do today, using nothing but the Earth's natural temperature regulation and a bit of rope. Souse meat with crackers was Christmas appetizer that transformed pork scraps into delicacy through careful preparation. The souse was made from pig heads, feet, and ears boiled until tender, then chopped fine and bound with gelatin from bones. Vinegar, onions, and spices were added before pressing mixture into loaf pans to set. By Christmas, the souse sliced clean, its texture firm and slightly gelatinous, its flavor tangy and rich. Served cold with saltine crackers, this was Christmas snacking that represented complete hog utilization. In mountain communities, souse meant respect for animals and refusal to waste anything. The vinegar preserved meat while adding brightness that cut through richness. Children learned to appreciate souse as grown-up food, its complex flavors marking passage into adult tastes. This was Christmas tradition born from necessity. proving that the finest cooking often came from using everything and wasting nothing. Using vinegar to tenderize meat was how mountain families transformed tough cuts into something approaching luxury without spending money they did not have available. A few splashes of apple cider vinegar added to the marinade broke down tough muscle fibers in wild game and older livestock that would otherwise require hours of cooking. Families made their own vinegar from apple scraps, so the ingredient cost nothing beyond initial effort. The acid worked slowly overnight, penetrating deep into meat while adding subtle tanginess that complemented strong flavors of venison, squirrel, and tough old roosters. Women learned exact proportions through generations of practice, knowing how much was enough to tenderize without making meat mushy. The marinated meat could then be fried, roasted, or stewed with significantly shorter cooking times. This trick made poor cuts taste like quality and stretched limited protein into satisfying meals. Crackling cornbread with cane syrup was Christmas-side that elevated simple cornbread into something rich and celebratory. The cracklings, crispy bits of rendered pork fat left from lard making, were mixed into cornbread batter before baking, creating pockets of crunchy, porky richness throughout. The bread baked in cast iron until crusty outside and tender inside, its top golden and inviting. Served with dark cane syrup drizzled over warm slices, this combined savory and sweet in ways that defined mountain eating. In rural communities, crackling cornbread meant using every part of the hog, transforming scraps into celebration. The cracklings added protein and flavor that plain cornbread lacked, while cane syrup provided sweetness families couldn't always afford. This was Christmas abundance created from what others might discard, proving mountain cooks knew how to make luxury from nothing. Cooking on the shovel blade was frontier ingenuity at its most practical when families lacked proper cookware or needed quick meals away from the kitchen hearth. A flat-bladed shovel, cleaned thoroughly and heated over open flames, became an instant griddle for frying eggs, toasting bread, or cooking small portions of meat. Field workers carried shovels anyway, making them dual-purpose tools that fed hungry workers during long days away from home. The metal heated evenly when held at the right angle over flames, and the long handle kept hands safe from the fire. Fathers showed sons how to judge temperature by watching metal change color and feeling heat radiating upward. Food cooked directly on the blade picked up a faint mineral taste that became associated with outdoor work and simple satisfaction. This technique required no additional equipment and worked anywhere a fire could be built, making it invaluable for remote work. Venison backstrap with wild mushroom gravy was Christmas luxury harvested from November hunts and preserved for holiday feast. The backstrap was the tenderest deer cut, saved specifically for Christmas when families wanted something special. Hunters took their best bucks in late fall, field-dressed properly, and hung meat in cold sheds where December temperatures kept it fresh. The backstrap was sliced thick, seasoned with salt and pepper, then seared quickly in hot cast iron to keep inside pink and tender. Wild mushrooms gathered in fall and dried were reconstituted and cooked into rich gravy using pan drippings, creating earthy depth complementing venison. In mountain communities, venison Christmas meant rifle skill, understanding deer movement, and respect for animals giving lives to feed families. This wasn't bought meat, but earned through cold mornings in tree stands. The backstrap melted on tongue, flavor clean and sweet. Families served it with potatoes and beans. Drying apples on string lines was the preservation method that turned autumn abundance into winter sustenance without any special equipment or expensive supplies. Apple slices were threaded onto long strings using needles, then hung from rafters, porches, or any warm, dry spot where air could circulate freely around each piece. The process took days or weeks depending on humidity, with families checking constantly for signs of mold or insect damage. Properly dried apples shriveled into leathery rings that could be stored in cloth bags for months without spoiling. Come winter, these dried slices were rehydrated in water or cider and cooked into pies, cobblers, and fried pies that tasted of concentrated sweetness. Children helped with threading, learning patience and satisfaction of preparing for harder times. The strings became decorative as well as practical, hanging in kitchens where their sweet smell mixed with wood smoke. Persimmon pudding with hard sauce was Christmas dessert that captured wild sweetness of mountain autumn. Persimmons had to be gathered after first frost when they became soft and intensely sweet, their astringency gone. The fruit was pressed through sieves to create smooth pulp mixed with flour, eggs, milk, spices, and molasses. Baked slowly, the pudding emerged dark and dense, its texture somewhere between cake and custard. Hard sauce, butter and sugar beaten until fluffy, flavored with vanilla or whiskey, melted over warm pudding, creating rich contrast. In mountain communities, persimmon pudding represented patience and knowledge, knowing when persimmons were ready, understanding how to preserve their flavor. The pudding was deeply spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg, its persimmon sweetness unlike anything else. This was Christmas dessert that couldn't be rushed or bought, requiring understanding of seasons and willingness to wait for nature's timing. Saving bacon grease in tin cans was the foundation of mountain cooking economy, providing fat for frying, seasoning, and flavoring that cost nothing beyond the original bacon. Every time bacon was cooked, the rendered fat was carefully strained through cloth into cans kept beside the stove, building a supply that lasted between hog killings. The grease replaced expensive butter and lard for everyday cooking, adding smoky richness to everything from fried eggs to cornbread. Women knew exactly how much grease remained in their cans and rationed it carefully through lean months. The cans were never washed, building layers of seasoned flavor that improved with age and use. Children learned early that pouring grease down the drain was wasteful foolishness that would earn sharp correction. A full grease can represent security, proof that the family could cook proper meals regardless of cash on hand. This practice continued in mountain kitchens long after it disappeared from cities. Salt-cured country ham was Christmas luxury, taking months to create and symbolizing prosperity through patience. These weren't store hams, but whole hog legs cured in salt, then hung in smokehouses through fall and winter. The curing began in November, with fresh hams rubbed with salt and sometimes sugar, drawing out moisture and preserving meat without refrigeration. By Christmas, hams developed deep mahogany exteriors and concentrated salty sweet flavor unlike anything modern. The ham was soaked overnight to remove excess salt, then baked slowly with brown sugar glaze, creating caramelized crust. Sliced thin, the meat was intensely flavorful, salty, smoky, rich, requiring only biscuits and red-eye gravy. In Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, country ham represented wealth and foresight, since families began curing in fall for Christmas. The smell of ham baking filled houses Christmas morning. This wasn't bought but made food, requiring knowledge of salt ratios and smoking. Using coffee grounds for scrubbing pots was how mountain women kept cast iron and heavy cookware clean without wasting precious soap. The coarse texture of spent grounds provided gentle abrasion that lifted stuck-on food and grease without scratching seasoned surfaces that had taken years to build. Women collected grounds after brewing, keeping them in a tin near the wash basin where they stayed slightly damp and ready for use. The natural oils in coffee also helped condition cast iron while cleaning, maintaining the protective layer that prevented rust. This method cost nothing since the grounds would otherwise be discarded, embodying the waste-nothing philosophy that defined mountain households. Children learned to scrub pots this way before being trusted with more delicate dishes. The faint coffee smell that lingered on clean cookware became associated with spotless kitchens. This trick worked so well that many families never purchased commercial scouring products. Fried squirrel with milk gravy turned small game into Christmas celebration, tasting like hickory nuts and mountain tradition. December, squirrels were fat from fall acorns, their meat firm and flavorful. Young boys went hunting Christmas Eve morning, fathers teaching them to shoot cleanly. The squirrels were cleaned, cut into pieces, then soaked overnight in salt water. On Christmas morning, they were dredged in seasoned flour and fried in hot lard until golden crispy. Pan drippings became milk gravy, flour stirred into hot fat, then milk added slowly until thickened creamy. Families served this over fresh-baked biscuits. In Appalachian communities, Squirrel Christmas meant teaching children to hunt, to provide. Understanding food came from work. The meat was tender and slightly nutty, each piece representing hours in cold December woods. Mothers fried batch after batch, keeping platters warm. This wasn't poverty food, but tradition connecting tables to land itself. Burying cabbages for winter was the root cellar technique that kept this cruciferous vegetable fresh for months without any processing or canning. Whole heads were pulled from the garden with roots attached, then buried upside down in trenches lined with straw, with only the roots exposed above ground. The earth's stable temperature prevented freezing while the straw provided insulation and drainage. Families dug up heads as needed through winter, brushing off dirt to reveal crisp leaves that tasted nearly as fresh as harvest day. The technique required dry soil and good drainage to prevent rot, so placement was chosen carefully. This method stored vegetables using nothing but the ground itself, requiring no jars, salt, or special equipment. Children were sent to dig up cabbages for Sunday dinner, learning where each head was buried. This ancient preservation method kept families supplied with fresh vegetables through the coldest months. Wild rabbit in brown gravy was the Christmas centerpiece mountain families harvested from snowy hillsides. These were wild cottontails tracked through December snow, caught in box traps or shot cleanly. The rabbits were skinned carefully, jointed, and browned slowly in pork fat until golden. They simmered for hours with wild onions and black pepper until meat fell off the bone. The cooking liquid became rich gravy thickened with flour. Families served this over biscuits or alongside stored potatoes. In eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, wild rabbit meant Christmas protein that cost nothing, just skill and land knowledge. Children learned holiday meals came from work, not stores. The meat was tender and mild, each piece representing winter mornings spent hunting. This represented self-reliance and connection between mountain people and their environment, proving Christmas abundance didn't require money when you had resourcefulness passed through generations. Cooking cornbread on a hoe blade was field cooking born from necessity when workers needed hot food far from any kitchen. The broad, flat blade of a garden hoe, scrubbed clean and heated over an open fire, became a makeshift griddle that cooked cornmeal batter into crusty cakes. Workers mixed batter in the morning and carried it to fields in covered pails, cooking fresh bread during midday breaks when hunger demanded more than cold biscuits. The technique gave hoe cakes their name, connecting the food directly to the tool and labor that defined rural life. The metal heated unevenly, requiring skill to rotate the blade and prevent burning while ensuring the center cooked through. The finished cakes had crispy edges and tender centers, tasting of smoke and honest work. This cooking method represented the ingenuity of people who refused to go hungry simply because proper equipment was unavailable. Blackberry jam cake was Christmas dessert, carrying summer's wild harvest into winter celebration. This wasn't ordinary cake, but dense creation, darkened with blackberry jam stirred into batter. The jam came from wild berries picked along fence rows in July, cooked with sugar and preserved. Come Christmas, jam transformed into cake moisture and flavor, tart, sweet, purple. The batter was spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, creating warmth, complementing berry brightness. Baked in cast iron, the cake emerged dark and fragrant, its crumb tight from jam. Some families added caramel icing, others served plain. In mountain communities, blackberry jam cake represented foresight and connection to land, picking berries in summer for Christmas months away. Children remembered helping pick berries, fingers stained purple. Understanding this work would become December dessert. The cake sliced thick, each piece carrying memories of summer foraging. Making vinegar from apple scraps was household alchemy that turned peels, cores, and bruised fruit into a versatile ingredient that cost nothing to produce. Apple scraps were placed in crocks with water and a bit of sugar, then covered with cloth and left in warm spots where natural yeasts could work. Over weeks, the mixture fermented first into hard cider, then slowly transformed into sharp vinegar as bacteria converted alcohol to acid. Families maintained mother cultures passed down through generations, adding them to new batches to speed the process and ensure consistent results. The finished vinegar was used for pickling, preserving, tenderizing meat, and dozens of household cleaning tasks. Nothing was wasted when apple peels could become something so useful. Children learned to tend the vinegar crocks, checking for mold and stirring occasionally. This simple process provided a staple ingredient that store-bought families had to purchase. Fried apple pies with sorghum were Christmas dessert that children waited for all year. Dried apples from summer harvest were rehydrated and cooked down with sorghum syrup, cinnamon, and nutmeg until thick and jammy. The filling was enclosed in circles of biscuit dough, crimped shut, and fried in hot lard until golden and crackling. The result was handheld Christmas joy. Crispy outside, molten apple inside, sweet and spiced. In rural communities, fried apple pies meant celebration accessible to poorest families, since dried apples cost nothing but summer work. Children received these as special treats, burning their mouths on hot filling while snow fell outside. The pies were portable, lasting days without refrigeration, making them perfect for holiday visiting. Each bite delivered concentrated apple sweetness balanced by pastry crunch, proving that simplest ingredients could create genuine luxury when prepared with care and love passed through generations. Adding molasses to beans was the sweetening trick that transformed plain pinto beans into something approaching Boston baked beans without expensive ingredients. A generous pour of sorghum molasses or blackstrap stirred into the bean pot during the last hour of cooking added depth, color, and a subtle sweetness that balanced the earthy bean flavor. The molasses also helped thicken the pot liquor into a glossy sauce that clung to each bean. Mountain families grew their own sorghum cane and pressed it into syrup, making molasses an affordable sweetener when white sugar was luxury few could afford. The combination of beans, molasses, and salt pork became a complete meal that satisfied for hours and cost almost nothing to prepare. Children often preferred molasses beans to plain, making them easier to feed during lean times. This technique spread through Appalachian communities as families shared recipes at church gatherings and community events. Baked sweet potatoes with butter and cinnamon were Christmas side that elevated garden staples into celebration. The sweet potatoes were stored in root cellars from fall harvest, their starches converting to sugars through winter. By Christmas, they were intensely sweet and ready for baking. Roasted whole until soft and caramelized, the potatoes were split and topped with butter and cinnamon, creating simple perfection. In rural communities, sweet potatoes represented food security. Easy to grow, simple to store, delicious when prepared well. Christmas meant breaking out the biggest, best potatoes saved specifically for celebration. The flesh was orange and creamy, naturally sweet without added sugar. Children loved sweet potatoes because they tasted like dessert despite being dinner. This represented mountain Christmas philosophy, taking what grew easily and treating it with enough respect to make it special, proving celebration didn't require expensive ingredients when you had good land and patient hands. Wrapping meat in corn husks before roasting was a preservation and cooking technique that kept moisture locked in while adding subtle sweetness to the finished dish. Fresh or dried corn husks were soaked until pliable, then wrapped tightly around seasoned cuts of pork, game, or poultry before being buried in coals or placed in Dutch ovens. The husks protected meat from direct heat while trapping steam inside, essentially creating a natural cooking pouch that basted the meat in its own juices. The corn imparted a faint sweetness that complemented pork especially well, creating flavor that seemed fancier than the simple method suggested. Families saved husks from corn season specifically for this purpose, drying them in bundles that hung from rafters until needed. The technique required no special equipment and produced consistently tender results. This method connected cooking to the harvest cycle, using every part of what the land provided. 30 baking secrets that lived in the hands of women who never thought to call them secrets. Pick one and try it the next time you turn on your oven. If your mother used one of these, or if she had a trick I did not name, tell me about it in the comments. And if this list brought back the smell of her kitchen, hit subscribe and come along, because there are more of these waiting. Until next time, take care.